Hi everyone, Alex Tardy here from the National Weather Service. We're going to talk about several things in this weather pattern change. Heat over inland areas, developing fog on the coast, and then monsoonal moisture, which means thunderstorms. Yeah, we're talking about monsoonal moisture, and here it is mid-May. Let's get going here. The weather pattern that controls our weather, even locally here in San Diego. It's warming already in the upper levels of the atmosphere. That's going to translate to the heat in the deserts and inland areas. There's a big storm system that's in the northern Pacific, Gulf of Alaska. That's going to wind down, weaken, and fill. So that's not going to be a factor. But what is going to be a factor is a broad upper level high pressure system, dome of warm air, that'll be building across the entire west, as shown here by Sunday. Now, we're also going to get a little bit of weak offshore flow, northerly winds. Those are going to stay too far east to call them Santa Ana, but they are going to be drawing some drier and cool air across the Great Basin area. So that'll weaken our onshore flow is the bottom line by Monday. Now, the monsoonal weather pattern I talked about, it's unusual. The weather pattern just stalls. The low pressure area we talked about weakens further early next week over the Pacific, non-factor here. Upper level high pressure area will start to bring a persistent, consistent east-southeast flow across the south and into Southern California as shown here. What does this mean? Well, it doesn't go away. And so what this means is by next week, mid to late week, monsoonal moisture, tropical moisture, all the way from Texas, continues to increase across our region, meaning the development of showers and thunderstorms, as shown here on the weather map for late next week. Now, it's not going to last forever. It looks like we get back into a more normal pattern. A cooler onshore flow pushes that moisture to the east, and we get the low clouds expanding and the much cooler temperatures next weekend. But we're going to have to deal with this prolonged summer-like pattern before that. Okay, what does this mean for us? It means that heat risk is going to increase across most of our area away from the immediate coast. And that means the orange level, moderate level, where temperatures will be much above normal this weekend and early next week across our deserts and expanding into our northern deserts as shown here and parts of the inland valleys. Actual temperatures. Well, they'll be much above normal, 100 to 106 across our deserts. That's hot for mid-May. Well into the 90s across the Inland Empire and even 80s over some of our inland valleys further west. Now the temperatures just get a little bit warmer and expand to our northern deserts and our inland valleys as we get into early next week as shown here. So we're talking about consecutive days over 100 in the deserts and consecutive days in the 90s for inland valleys. I want to show you some of the tropical moisture. Hard to believe, and this is how monsoon sets up. It first starts in the mid part of the atmosphere up around 10, 15,000 feet. That'll be increasing as early as this weekend, and then we'll really get that monsoonal moisture, tropical moisture, early next week, as shown here. Now the marine layer, it'll be doing the opposite. It's really deep now, and it'll be lowering and squashing because of that dome of warm air aloft. So when we get into early next week, it gets low enough where we start calling it fog, and where it really hangs out along our immediate coast. Now, the monsoonal moisture, where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from a big source of tropical moisture that's sitting over Texas. A part of that's going to be pulled off, and with that flow, which is what monsoon means, that monsoonal flow, east-southeast flow, it's going to be pulling it across the southern deserts of the southwest and even southern California. When we get into mid-late next week, it's really right over us. Big chunk of it gets pulled off and makes it all the way to the San Diego coast. So, that's a factor in humidity, in the moisture levels of the atmosphere. First in the mid levels, but then eventually all the way down to the surface where we leave. where we live. And that also means that the threat for thunderstorms increase, potentially even all the way to some coastal areas. The first threat for thunderstorms looks to be Tuesday, Wednesday period, as shown here. And then as we go deeper into this pattern, some of those storms may drift off the mountains. And even some of the storms may form on their own over the valleys and coast. We call those elevated thunderstorms because they don't need the mountains. So we'll see what happens next week, but a significant monsoonal pattern setting up. Lightning, it's not that common on the coast. And it is more common over mountain areas, and that'll be the case next week. A lot like what we normally see, but it's just not normally in mid-May. So about a month or so ahead of schedule. I looked back in some other years, and we did have an event in late June that brought monsoonal tropical moisture into Southern California all the way to the coast and actually wrapped it up into the Pacific Northwest in late June of 2015. The marine layer, what will it be doing? Well, normally the marine layer is around, right, in May and June. We call those the May gray, June gloom. The marine layer will be getting squashed from that warmer air, but it won't go away. It'll get stubborn along the immediate coast. Now in the afternoon, we get what's called the sea breeze, and that usually spills and offsets all that warm, lower pressure air inland. That will have less influence on our inland valleys because that marine layer will start getting squashed and you'll get less spillover inland, less penetration inland. Now, this time of year, May and June, yep, we know, and it is true that that's when we get our least sunshine along the coast and more cloudy days. But it's also true that we are now getting into more like a July-August pattern with this heat wave setting up in this monsoonal flow as well. So things aren't quite normal at all. Let's take a quick look at the last winter period. We've been talking about it a lot. Dark green shaded, it's about 2 times as wet as normal. It wasn't the wettest winter on record across much of the West, but it certainly ranked in the top as shown on the left-hand side. Now, if you put California all together and average it out, again, not the wettest year on record, but on average about 27 inches of precipitation, putting it near the top and much above normal, that black average line. Locations across Southern California, pick your favorite location. They all were wet, and they all were wetter than normal. Most remarkable were some of our coastal areas in Orange County and northern San Diego County. Most remarkable were our mountain areas, which landed in top 10 wettest compared to average. And you can see the averages on the right-hand side were doubled up in a lot of places in Southern California, with still remaining water year to go. What was remarkable was December through March. That's where the records were broken. Dark green shaded, that's where the storm track was persistent. That's where 2 times normal precipitation occurred, and that's the dark green shaded on the right-hand side that was record wettest. The snowpack was the biggest story, and that snow is going to be melting rapidly in this upcoming heat wave. That snowpack, it's still remarkable. It's still 3 times normal for this time in mid-May. It exceeded any year for snow water content and even beat the El Nino of 82-83. So 2022-23 on top for record snowpack. Check your latest forecast if you know anyone living near streams and rivers that will be affected by this. Most of the snow in Southern California has melted, except we still have significant snowpack above 7,500 feet. In fact, you can see here there's still about 37 inches of water up around 9,500 feet in San Gorgonio Mountain. Now the Sierra Nevada, widespread above 7,000 feet of water that's going to melt over the next several weeks and months. Water up around 75 inches totaling. So really remarkable, much above normal snowpack right now. The drought improved. That was the biggest story probably across California. The improvement is shown here. Major improvement, removing drought over most of the state. Now drought still lingers across parts of the Great Basin and Pacific Northwest and the Rockies. So we still have water deficits across the Great Basin, specifically Lake Mead and Lake Powell, only about 30% capacity. But now the snowmelt will even be starting to improve those reservoirs, but they may not improve, likely won't improve to where we really need them. In California, different story. Our reservoirs are already mostly entirely full. Thanks for watching this latest weather briefing from the National Weather Service. Finally, I want to leave you with two things. On here is the latest ocean water temperatures. It should really be noticeable about the development of El Nino along the equator, but also the persistent warm temperatures in the central northern Pacific. We eroded some of those due to the white line. That was the average jet stream pattern this past winter. So water temperatures not only cooled, but became below normal along the west coast. That's starting to modify now. So we have two things going on. We have a development of the El Nino, which won't influence our weather much this summer at all, but it will make for tropical cyclone or hurricane activity potentially above normal, because that's where the hurricanes come from along the equator. But we have other things going on in the Pacific where we just cannot get rid of this unusual warmth, and that's really a reflection of the past year's drought and excessive heat from 2020 to 2022. So I want to leave you with the latest image here that yes, El Nino's here. It's going to translate to more tropical activity, but it remains to be seen. It's really unknown what it'll do to most of our weather up here in Southern California over the next several months. Thanks for tuning in.